Have you ever felt the invisible strings tugging at your mind, subtle yet relentless, guiding your thoughts, your choices, your very desires, without your conscious consent? Pause, if you can, and consider the last time someone smiled at you and you found yourself agreeing to something you had no intention of doing, or the last time a whispered suggestion wrapped itself around your will until you could no longer remember who you truly were beneath it. What if I told you that this is not a failure of character, not a flaw in your morality, but an inevitability born from the architecture of human interaction itself, that every word spoken, every gesture made, every carefully concealed glance can be a weapon, a lever, a mechanism designed to shift your mind, and that all of us, no matter how vigilant, are caught in a vast invisible lattice of manipulation that we seldom even perceive. The question is not whether you will be manipulated, it is how long it will take before you realize it, and whether, once you do, you will possess the clarity, the ruthlessness, the insight to stop it from happening again. In the shadowed corridors of power, where the lofty halls of influence and the hidden chambers of ambition intersect, manipulation is not an aberration, it is the language of survival. Niccolo Machiavelli, whose name has become synonymous with the cold calculus of power, understood this truth with crystalline clarity. He saw human nature not as a tapestry of virtue and vice neatly separated, but as a landscape of desire, fear, and self-interest, perpetually shifting, endlessly exploitable. To be manipulated is to be read, to be mapped, to be predicted. It is to reveal the contours of your mind, without ever realizing you have done so, to allow your own instincts and emotions to be turned against you with surgical precision. And yet, within this dark understanding lies a possibility, a promise, the possibility of reclaiming your agency, of seeing the invisible, of recognizing the strings before they are tugged, and ultimately, of becoming unassailable. Consider the earliest encounters of manipulation in your life, the moments that seemed trivial at the time but left traces on your decision-making, shaping patterns of trust, suspicion, and compliance. The child who learns to obey not because of reason, but because of the sharpness of a parent's disappointment. The adolescent who bends to peer pressure, feeling the cold weight of social expectation pressing on the spine. The adult who nods in agreement during a conversation, only later realizing that their consent was never truly given, that the words they uttered were chosen not by their own reason, but by someone else's subtle orchestration. Manipulation is woven into the fabric of our earliest relationships, embedded in the rhythm of social exchange, cloaked in the guise of care, concern, or rational persuasion. And yet, the more subtle it is, the more effective it becomes. The sharpest knives are often hidden in velvet. Machiavelli would have told you that, to resist manipulation, one must first observe it with unsentimental clarity. Sentiment, morality, and trust are not weaknesses only in themselves, they are the avenues through which others enter your mind. To recognize manipulation, you must cultivate a mind that can distinguish the faintest tremor of intent behind words, gestures, and silences. You must learn to read the hidden motivations of those around you, to see the ambitions, fears, and insecurities that animate their actions. Human behavior is not chaotic, it is patterned, and every action, when examined closely, reveals a network of cause and desire. The manipulator, consciously or unconsciously, relies on your inability to discern these patterns, on your willingness to assume goodness where none exists, on your habitual obedience to social rituals that mask strategic intent. Imagine a room filled with people, all engaged in polite conversation, laughing, nodding, signaling agreement. Beneath the surface, however, is a network of subtle exchanges, a flicker of envy, a momentary fear, a carefully deployed compliment designed to lower your defenses. Every smile has weight, every pause carries implication. The manipulator watches you as closely as you watch the world. They understand that human decision-making is rarely rational, that emotions precede logic, that desires are more powerful than principles. In this landscape, every conversation is a battlefield, every interaction a potential site of conquest. To enter it unarmed is to surrender before the fight has begun. To resist manipulation is not merely to say no, it is to anticipate, to calculate, to control the flow of influence before it reaches you. It is to recognize the architecture of persuasion in its infancy, to perceive the scaffolding of intention that underlies words and gestures. A manipulator will test your boundaries with small incursions, A soft suggestion here, a carefully phrased question there. They will seek to establish patterns, to see how you respond under pressure, to identify the levers that move your will. They operate not through overt coercion, but through subtle erosion, shaping your perception of reality until your choices seem like your own when they are in fact borrowed. Machiavelli's insight was that this is the fundamental dynamic of power, present not only in kings and courtiers, but in every human relationship, between lovers, friends, colleagues, and rivals. And yet, there is a truth that Machiavelli also understood. Knowledge is power, but awareness is liberation. The first step in never being manipulated again is not aggression, not paranoia, but observation. To watch without judgment, to catalogue without attachment, to see every human action as a vector of intent, every word as a potential instrument of influence. When you can identify the patterns that others rely upon, when you can anticipate the subtle movements of desire, fear, and ambition, you step outside the current that carries the unobservant. You are no longer simply reacting, you are positioning yourself strategically, calculating the terrain of influence before stepping onto it. Consider the nature of fear and desire, the twin engines of human compliance. People obey because they hope for reward or fear reprisal. The manipulator understands this and calibrates their approach accordingly. Flattery appeals to desire, criticism, even feint, can evoke fear. Silence can be as compelling as speech, indecision as powerful as command. To resist manipulation, you must first understand the architecture of your own impulses, the triggers that guide your behavior, the subtle strings that can be plucked by those who study you. This is you. Uncomfortable knowledge, to see yourself not as a free agent, but as a being shaped by forces both internal and external. Yet in that acknowledgement lies the path to freedom. Awareness transforms vulnerability into strategy, instinct into calculated defense. Human relationships are replete with mirrors and masks. A manipulator will often present a reflection of your own desires back to you, creating the illusion of alignment, while quietly steering you toward their objectives. They are experts in misdirection, using empathy as a veil, kindness as camouflage, logic as a tool to disguise intent. They rely on your tendency to trust the familiar, to assume reciprocity, to see integrity where it may be absent. To never be manipulated again, you must train your mind to pierce the mask, to see the reflection for what it is, a carefully constructed projection, and to respond not emotionally but strategically. But awareness alone is insufficient. You must cultivate resilience, the capacity to maintain equanimity in the face of provocation, uncertainty, and subtle coercion. Manipulation thrives on distraction, confusion, and emotional turbulence. When your mind is unsteady, your decisions are malleable, and your agency is compromised. Emotional intelligence, self-mastery, and deliberate reflection are not mere virtues, they are armor. Machiavelli would argue that those who cannot govern themselves cannot hope to withstand the governance of others over their minds. The manipulator counts on impulsivity and unexamined reflex. Deny them this weapon. In the theater of manipulation, timing is as critical as insight. The manipulator observes patiently, often weeks or months, learning patterns, exploiting weaknesses, waiting for the precise moment when intervention is most effective. The unprepared mind is like a fortress with open gates, defenseless not because it lacks strength, but because it is blind to the siege. Strategic awareness requires the cultivation of patience, the discipline to observe without immediate reaction, the capacity to withhold judgment until patterns reveal themselves fully. Only then can one act decisively, with a precision that neutralizes the manipulative force before it strikes. Machiavelli's brilliance lay not in moralizing, but in dissecting human behavior with surgical clarity. To understand manipulation is not to be cynical, but to see the world as it is, stripped of comforting illusions. People act from self-interest, desire, fear, and ambition. Alliances are fragile, promises are contingent, and loyalty is a commodity. To navigate this terrain, one must develop not only perception but strategy, the ability to move within a web of influence without being ensnared. Every interaction becomes an experiment, every conversation a reconnaissance, every relationship a map to be studied and understood. And so, the journey begins with a question. Can you perceive the invisible currents shaping your life? Can you detect the subtle shifts of intention beneath a smile, the silent pressure behind a polite request, the quiet architecture of influence that molds your choices before you recognize it? To say no to manipulation is to enter a new realm of cognition, one where observation, analysis, patience, and reflection converge into a singular disciplined awareness. It is not a comfortable journey, for it strips away illusions, reveals hidden motives, and forces you to confront the ways in which you have been read, predicted, and guided by others. Yet within this discomfort lies the promise of mastery, the promise that you may finally move through the world unshackled, perceiving the levers of influence before they are pulled, and reclaiming the freedom that is the foundation of power. Consider the metaphor of the chessboard, vast and infinite. Each piece moves according to its nature, yet each is part of a larger strategy, a game played by unseen hands. The manipulator is like a grandmaster, anticipating moves, probing weaknesses, feinting and baiting. To never be manipulated again, you must learn to play simultaneously as observer, strategist, and player, seeing not only the immediate interactions, but the entire network of intention, consequence, and influence. Awareness without strategy is impotent. Strategy without observation is blind. Together, they form the architecture of unassailable agency. There is a truth that many refuse to admit. Human behavior is predictable, not because people are weak, but because their desires, fears, and ambitions follow discernible patterns. Those who exploit this knowledge operate in shadows, weaving subtle threads that bind others without overt force. Yet once you recognize the weave, you can step outside it, untangle yourself, and move with deliberate clarity. The first steps are observation, reflection, and the cultivation of strategic awareness. The subsequent steps are patience, discipline, and the development of resilience that transforms vulnerability into armor, impulsivity into deliberation, and perception into preemptive action. The mind that cannot be manipulated is not born, it is forged through careful attention to patterns of human behavior, relentless analysis of intent, and the cultivation of self-mastery. It is a mind that watches the world without illusion, that perceives motive without sentiment, that acts with precision where others are swayed by impulse. Machiavelli would remind us that power is not merely seized, it is understood, navigated, and preserved. The same principles that govern kings, generals, and courtiers apply to everyday life: the careful study of human behavior, the anticipation of action, the deployment of calculated strategy. In the realm of influence, to observe is to empower oneself, to act without awareness is to surrender. So ask yourself again, when the next smile is offered, when the next suggestion is made, when the next appeal tugs at the edges of your mind, will you perceive it for what it is? Will you see the architecture of manipulation before it ensnares you, the subtle currents before they sweep you along? Will you cultivate the clarity, patience, and resilience to respond not with reflex, but with strategy? The path to never being manipulated again is not one of brute force or moral righteousness. It is one of disciplined perception, calculated action, and relentless awareness. Each encounter becomes a lesson, each observation a tool, each interaction a test of agency. In this landscape of shadowed intention, every human is a potential manipulator, every word a vector of influence, every gesture a probe into your mind. Yet within this reality lies freedom, freedom born from awareness, mastery born from observation, power born from clarity. To never be manipulated again is to step into the mind of Machiavelli, to see the world unflinchingly, and to understand that the greatest power is the power to govern oneself amidst the endless currents of human ambition. And once you have stepped into that mind, once you have seen the invisible strings and felt the weight of their pull, you will never again surrender your will so lightly, for you will have learned the most ruthless lesson of all. To perceive is to prevent, to understand is to conquer, and to act with clarity is to be truly free. The shadows of influence will always linger. The whispers of desire and fear will continue to press against the gates of your mind, but with patience, strategy, and ruthless self-awareness, you can move through the world as though unobserved, untouchable, and unconquerable. The journey begins here, with the recognition of the invisible, the analysis of the subtle, and the cultivation of the mind that sees, anticipates, and commands. Machiavelli's insight is not a promise of safety, but a path to agency, a path that, once embraced, ensures that no hand, no word, no subtle artifice can bend you to another's will again. The question lingers, haunting and precise. Will you remain a pawn in the game of influence, or will you rise to become the master of your own mind? The world does not hand clarity freely. It demands that you pierce through layers of illusion, that you confront the uncomfortable truths others hide and the uncomfortable truths you hide from yourself. To resist manipulation, to never again be swept by unseen currents, you must first understand that humans are not bound by reason as much as by perception. We act on what we believe to be true, what we feel in the marrow of our instincts, and what we are persuaded to desire. The manipulator knows this. They understand that reality is not a single truth, but a malleable construct, sculpted by language, emotion, and suggestion. And so, the first weapon you must wield against manipulation is the recognition that your perception is both the battleground and the prize. To control the influence of others, you must first control the lens through which you see the world. Manipulation often begins in invisibility, in the subtlest nudges that shape thought before awareness can intervene. A tone, a glance, a carefully placed word can trigger a cascade of mental responses. You may believe your decisions are autonomous, yet each choice may already have been guided by forces you never recognized. To escape this web, you must cultivate an unrelenting attention to detail, a habit of noticing not only what is said but what is implied, not only what is done but what is withheld. Machiavelli's insight into human behavior teaches that intention is always present, whether overt or hidden, and that every action, however innocuous it appears, can carry the weight of calculated strategy. Think of a simple interaction. A colleague praises your work, but there is a pause before the smile, a slight hesitation in their words. To most, it is a compliment. To the observant mind, it is a test, an exploration of your response. Will you bask in the glow of affirmation? Will you seek further approval? Or will you maintain an internal equilibrium, unmoved by subtle probes? These micro-battles occur constantly, unnoticed by those untrained to see them. Yet each one leaves a mark, subtly shifting the contours of your decision-making, nudging you toward compliance. Recognizing the rhythm of these interactions is the first step toward dismantling the invisible chains that bind your will. The mechanics of influence are simple, yet profound: fear, desire, and social expectation. Humans are predictably drawn to reward and predictably repelled by threat. The manipulator harnesses these drives with precision, often cloaked in warmth, logic, or apparent friendship. They understand that the sharpest edges are hidden beneath velvet gestures, that compliance achieved willingly is more durable than that forced by obvious coercion. To resist, you must first understand the architecture of your own impulses, what moves you, what you crave, and what you dread. Awareness of your internal triggers is not weakness, it is armor. Only when you know where you are vulnerable can you begin to reinforce those points. Harden your will against intrusion. Every human interaction contains patterns, and manipulators are masters of reading them. They observe, they wait, they test. The strategist within you must learn to do the same. Begin by cataloging behavior, by noting repetition, by observing reactions. Otis, who yields to flattery, who recoils from criticism, who bends under subtle social pressure. In understanding the manipulator's method, you understand the architecture of human influence itself. This is not paranoia, it is disciplined observation, the practice of seeing the machinery behind the facade. Yet the battle against manipulation is not solely intellectual. Emotion is both the battleground and the weapon. The manipulator exploits empathy, guilt, and the need for approval. They know that your willingness to forgive, to assume good intentions, to seek connection, can be turned into a lever of control. To resist, you must cultivate emotional detachment without detachment from life itself. This is not coldness, it is clarity. It is the ability to observe without being swept away, to feel without surrendering your agency, to recognize the tug of influence and counter it with deliberate thought, rather than instinctive reaction. Consider deception the most pervasive instrument of manipulation. Lies are rarely blatant. They are folded into truth, embedded within gestures, nuanced in tone, crafted to align with expectations and desires. The manipulator understands that credibility is built over time, and that a single falsehood, carefully placed, can bend perception without resistance. To never be manipulated again, you must become fluent in this language. Question the obvious, test consistency, observe incongruities, and track patterns over time. Truth reveals itself not in isolated statements, but in trajectories of behavior. A single moment may deceive, patterns never lie. The unobservant mind is vulnerable because it is predictably reactive. Impulse, hope, and fear guide choices, and manipulators exploit this with surgical subtlety. But the mind trained in awareness can perceive the scaffoldings of influence before they are fully deployed. The key is not nihilism, but anticipation, the ability to foresee the ways in which others will attempt to bend your will and to fortify your response before engagement occurs. This is the essence of Machiavellian strategy, not to wait to be struck, but to understand the battlefield and move with calculated precision. Isolation of thought is another weapon of the manipulator. They seek to control the flow of information, to frame narratives, to surround you with perspectives that shape belief. To resist, you must cultivate mental autonomy, the habit of seeking multiple angles, questioning consensus, and considering motives behind every communication. The mind that can evaluate independently, that can weigh intention alongside information, is much harder to bend than one which passively absorbs reality as presented. Trust, too, is a weapon and a liability. Humans are conditioned to assume reciprocity, to mirror behavior, to respond in kind to kindness. Manipulators exploit this instinct, offering trust to earn trust, only to wield the latter against you. To resist, cultivate discernment, grant trust deliberately, observe the consequences, and understand that not all reciprocity is genuine. Recognize that vulnerability can be strategic, but it must be paired with vigilance, awareness, and the capacity to withdraw when boundaries are tested. Every encounter, every conversation, every gesture is a potential battleground of influence. The manipulator seeks to occupy your mind, to direct your perception, to guide your choices. Their tools are subtle, a compliment, a hesitation, an appeal to fear, an alignment with desire. They operate with patience and precision, testing, probing, and calibrating. To resist is to adopt a similar rigor, observation without attachment, analysis without emotion, response without reflex. Awareness and discipline together create a state in which influence loss ease its power, where manipulation becomes transparent, predictable, and thus powerless. The strategic mind does not react, it calculates. It does not assume goodness, it tests for consistency. It does not surrender to impulse, it evaluates triggers, patterns, and consequences. Machiavelli's teachings are clear. Power lies in understanding, in anticipation, in the ability to act before being acted upon. The manipulator depends on inattention, the unmanipulable mind depends on observation. They rely on emotional exploitation. The disciplined mind cultivates awareness and self-mastery. Even subtle forms of influence, peer pressure, social expectation, cultural norms, can be manipulated to shift behavior. The unobservant mind bends unconsciously, guided by the currents around it. Awareness transforms these currents into measurable forces. Recognize them, map them, and you step beyond their sway. Resistance is not passive, it is strategic. It is the deliberate calibration of self in the midst of the invisible forces that seek to bend it. There is also the art of preemption. The manipulator acts not only in the present but anticipates your reactions, tests your resilience, and adjusts their approach. To counter this, you must cultivate foresight, the capacity to envision potential manipulations and erect defenses before engagement. Every interaction becomes a simulation. You test possibilities, weigh intentions, and prepare responses. Strategy is anticipatory, not reactive. Awareness alone is insufficient. It must be paired with deliberate positioning and calculated intervention. The mind untrained in these disciplines will succumb repeatedly, unaware of the mechanisms that direct its decisions. The mind disciplined in observation, analysis, emotional regulation, and strategic foresight, however, can navigate social complexity unscathed. It sees the hand before the cards are dealt, the move before the feint, the influence before the enticement. This is not paranoia. It is the cultivation of clarity, the development of a mind that is perceptive, resilient, and unyielding. Manipulation is inevitable because humans are predictably influenced, and the world is rich with actors who understand this. Yet inevitability does not equal inevitability of failure. To never be manipulated again requires training the mind to perceive the unseen, to anticipate intention, and to maintain control of internal impulses. Knowledge becomes a shield, awareness a sword. The unmanipulable mind is not one that assumes virtue in others, but one that recognizes patterns, observes consequences, and maintains agency above all. Consider again the subtle interplay of fear and desire. People obey authority, comply with expectation, and yield to persuasion because of these twin forces. The manipulator calibrates their application with precision, offering just enough reward to entice, just enough threat to dissuade, and monitoring reactions with vigilance. To resist is to maintain a self-contained equilibrium, to recognize the leverages before they are engaged, and to respond with deliberate intention rather than reflexive compliance. Self-awareness and observation transform vulnerability into armor. The journey toward unassailable agency is gradual, cumulative, and relentless. Each observation, each analysis, each test strengthens the mind's ability to perceive and counter influence. The manipulator's power is reduced not by confrontation alone, but by continuous cultivation of perception, discipline, and strategic foresight. The mind becomes like a fortress whose gates are guarded not by walls alone, but by vigilance, anticipation, and clarity. And yet, even as you develop these defenses, remember the most subtle form of manipulation is within yourself. Desire, fear, hope, and expectation can betray you if left unchecked. Machiavelli would caution that self-mastery is the foundation upon which all external defenses rest. To govern the world around you, first govern the world within. Recognize your own patterns, anticipate your own reactions, and fortify your will against internal sway before confronting external influence. The manipulator thrives on predictability. The unmanipulable mind cultivates unpredictability within reason, a disciplined randomness, the ability to act without reflex, to withhold consent, to observe without engagement until the contours of influence are clear. Every interaction becomes a test, every observation a lesson, every decision a deliberate act of agency. The architecture of unassailability is built one conscious choice at a time. To never be manipulated again is to step fully into the mind of Machiavelli, to see influence as it is, inevitable, structured, and predictable, yet conquerable through observation, discipline, and strategic foresight. The lessons are not comfortable, the truths not gentle, but within them lies freedom, freedom from the subtle yokes of others' desires, fears, and ambitions. Awareness is your first victory, discipline your second, and strategy your ultimate triumph. The invisible threads that once guided your mind, that once bent your will with subtle precision, now lie exposed. The forces that once shaped your decisions without consent are rendered transparent. Yet this clarity is only the beginning, for to maintain freedom, to remain unmanipulated in a world where influence is constant, one must continue to observe, to analyze, and to act with calculated intention. The mind that is vigilant, disciplined, and strategic is a mind that cannot be moved without consent, an unassailable fortress amidst a sea of subtle currents, waiting not for opportunity, but creating it. You have begun to see the machinery of manipulation, to recognize the hidden levers of influence and the silent architecture of persuasion. You have begun to cultivate observation, discipline, and strategic foresight. But this is only the second stage. To truly master your agency, you must go further, exploring the deepest, most subtle currents of human behavior, the hidden desires, the unspoken fears, the whispered ambitions that guide actions unseen. Only then will you truly step beyond manipulation and begin to wield your freedom as a weapon, moving through the world not as a pawn, but as a strategist of your own destiny. The human mind is a labyrinth, intricate and deceptive, and those who seek to manipulate it know its corridors intimately. They navigate the twists and turns of desire, fear, ambition, and doubt, tracing every shadowed pathway until they understand how to lead you precisely where they wish. You might believe your choices are free, yet each decision is often the outcome of invisible forces, forces that act not openly but in whispered suggestions, half glances, carefully measured pauses, and the subtle rhythms of speech. To never be manipulated again, you must learn to walk this labyrinth consciously, to recognize every hidden pathway, to anticipate the detours laid by others, and to chart a course that remains entirely your own. Consider how power operates quietly in relationships. It is rarely announced. It seeps in gradually, through familiarity, obligation, and expectation. The manipulator's genius lies in the accumulation of minor advantages. A word here, a favor there, a shadow of praise or criticism, each small enough to seem insignificant but together shaping the landscape of thought and choice. Awareness alone is insufficient. You must cultivate the capacity to perceive the cumulative effect of these subtle pressures, to understand that influence is often most effective not in dramatic gestures, but in the invisible, almost imperceptible currents that steer the mind over time. Humans have a deep-seated need for coherence and meaning. We desire explanations for events, reasons for behavior, and patterns in the chaos of life. Manipulators exploit this need by providing narratives that align with our expectations, desires, and fears. A compliment framed strategically, a warning disguised as guidance, an appeal to morality or loyalty. These are tools that bend perception, nudging you toward decisions that are not entirely your own. To resist such subtle invasions, you must cultivate the habit of questioning not only what is said, but why it is said, what it conceals as much as what it reveals, and what the ultimate effect on your perception might be. Emotion is the battlefield of influence. Desire, fear, hope, and anger are the levers manipulators pull with precision. They understand that reasoning alone rarely governs behavior. Feeling governs first, rationalization follows. To resist, you must develop emotional literacy, the capacity to recognize when your feelings are being provoked by external intent, to differentiate between genuine internal impulse and manipulated response. Emotional mastery is not denial, it is clarity. It is the ability to acknowledge emotion without surrendering decision-making to it, to let sensation inform but not control. Manipulation is often recursive and self-reinforcing. Once a manipulator has planted a seed of doubt, fear, or desire, they observe the reaction, adjust, and press further. Their patience is vast, their observation meticulous. To never be manipulated again, you must cultivate a similar patience and meticulousness within yourself, not to exploit others, but to maintain the sanctity of your own mind. Each interaction becomes a series of data points. Observe carefully, interpret with precision, and respond with intentionality. Reactivity is surrender. Deliberate response is mastery. The most dangerous manipulations are invisible, internalized by the mind itself. Guilt, shame, unexamined biases, and ingrained social conditioning are all tools manipulators use. They need not raise a finger. They need only activate pre-existing structures in your mind. Recognition of these internal vulnerabilities is paramount. Self-examination, brutal and uncompromising, allows you to identify the triggers that have guided you unknowingly and to erect mental defenses against them. This is Machiavelli's dark wisdom. Mastery begins within, with the unflinching study of self. Social proof, the desire to belong, the pull of collective opinion, all of these are silent vectors of influence. The manipulator exploits them by framing choices as normal, desirable, or inevitable. To resist, you must cultivate independence of thought. Observe patterns in the behavior of groups, but evaluate each action for its impact on your own agency. Conformity is a subtle form of manipulation. Awareness of its mechanics is the first step in reclaiming autonomy. Manipulators also exploit cognitive biases, our tendency to seek patterns, to favor immediate rewards over long-term benefits, to overestimate our understanding of others' intentions. Recognizing these biases in yourself is crucial. Each bias is a doorway, a point of entry for influence. By mapping them, by anticipating where they might be exploited, you render yourself less predictable, less malleable, and increasingly resistant to external control. Strategic foresight is the antidote to manipulation. Observe not only the present, but the probable sequence of events. Understand motives as vectors, predicting how desire and fear will guide actions before they are executed. A manipulator operates on the principle of anticipation, so too must you. Map intentions, observe reactions, and always plan your responses in advance. Anticipation transforms vulnerability into control. The mind that cannot be manipulated is disciplined in attention. It notices inconsistencies, detects omissions, and weighs motives with precision. Every action by others becomes information, every word a clue, every hesitation an insight. The disciplined observer does not accept reality at face value, but reconstructs it from multiple vantage points, triangulating truth and recognizing deception with clarity. This mental vigilance is exhausting, yet it is the foundation of unassailable agency. Manipulation often thrives in ambiguity, where meaning is uncertain and decisions are pressured. To resist, cultivate tolerance for uncertainty, pause before responding, analyze before acting, and avoid filling voids with assumption. Every hesitation allows observation to catch up to impulse. Every reflective pause diminishes the manipulator's advantage. The unmanipulable mind is methodical, deliberate, and patient. It does not rush, it calculates. The subtlety of influence is often found in the framing of choices. A manipulator will present options that appear neutral or beneficial, while steering you toward a predetermined outcome. Recognition of framing is crucial. Step back, evaluate the full spectrum of possibilities, and consider outcomes beyond those presented. By expanding the decision space, you reclaim control, turning the manipulator's design into transparency. Even the language of politeness, of diplomacy, of kindness can be weaponized. The manipulator cloaks intent in socially acceptable forms, masking pressure beneath respect, feigned concern, or camaraderie. To resist, cultivate discernment that separates tone from substance. Read the intention behind the gesture, not the gesture itself. Social etiquette becomes a veil. Your perception must pierce it without disruption. History is rich with examples. The advisor who whispers half-truths to kings, the courtier who feigns loyalty while orchestrating downfall, the seemingly benign mentor who molds decisions through subtle nudges. Machiavelli understood that influence operates not only through force, but through anticipation, manipulation, and the careful orchestration of perception. To navigate the world unmanipulated, one must adopt a similar strategic vision, not to deceive, but to protect. Internal discipline amplifies observation. The manipulator thrives on distraction, on emotional turbulence, on reactive impulsivity. By cultivating focus, emotional stability, and reflective detachment, you deny the manipulator the conditions for success. Your mind becomes an environment of predictability for yourself and unpredictability for others. Strategic detachment is armor. Awareness without control is incomplete. Control without awareness is brittle. The union of both forms the unassailable mind. Consider every conversation as reconnaissance. Each gesture, each inflection, each pause is data. The manipulator collects relentlessly. You must do the same. Build patterns, detect anomalies, and anticipate strategy. The mind trained in observation sees not just what is said, but what is avoided, what is implied, what is being tested. Every interaction becomes a window into intention. Finally, recognize that unmanipulability is not isolation. Engagement with the world continues, but with awareness as your shield and strategy as your compass, influence will always exist. The key is to enter interactions consciously, armed with anticipation, observation, and self-mastery. Freedom is not the absence of manipulation. It is the ability to perceive, evaluate, and respond with deliberate agency, rendering subtle coercion ineffective. To never be manipulated again is to cultivate a mind that sees both the surface and the undercurrent, that perceives intention in silence, patterns in behavior, and consequence in action. It is a mind that observes without reaction, that feels without surrender, that acts without impulsivity, that understands both others and self with ruthless clarity. Machiavelli's dark insight becomes your guide. The architecture of influence can be understood, anticipated, and ultimately neutralized. And as you traverse the intricate web of human behavior, remember this: mastery over your own mind is the first victory. Anticipation of others' manipulations is the second. The third, and most enduring, is the relentless cultivation of awareness and strategy, ensuring that no hand, no word, no subtle artifice ever bends your will again. In this relentless vigilance, in this disciplined engagement with the currents of influence, you step fully into the realm of unmanipulable agency, moving through the world not as prey, but as a master of your own destiny. Manipulation is rarely overt. It hides in plain sight, camouflaged as advice, camaraderie, or concern. The manipulator's power lies in subtlety, in shaping perception before action, in exploiting gaps between instinct and awareness. Every human interaction is a battlefield where unseen forces tug at your thoughts, desires, and fears, nudging you toward decisions that may serve another's interest more than your own. To remain unmanipulated, you must first accept the uncomfortable truth: the world is not neutral. Benevolence, reason, and friendship are not guarantees of freedom from influence. They are merely tools, and you, whether conscious or not, are often their instrument. The first act of resistance is recognition, the piercing of illusion. Observe the human mind; it is predictable. Fear, desire, attachment, and expectation shape thought long before logic arrives to justify it. The manipulator understands this architecture and acts accordingly. They whisper suggestions that seem innocuous, pose questions that shape reflection, and offer choices that feel free yet are confined. To never be manipulated again is to map these contours of cognition, to detect the subtle tugs, and to fortify the mind against them. Awareness alone is insufficient. Discipline must follow. Emotional reflex must yield to deliberate thought. The unmanipulable mind is both sentinel and strategist, seeing the battlefield and positioning itself advantageously before engagement. Subtle manipulation often begins with trust. Humans are conditioned to assume goodwill, to mirror intentions, to seek alignment. A manipulator exploits this inclination, offering apparent alignment to gain insight, influence, or leverage. Observe closely: a smile that lingers too long, praise that feels calibrated, advice that resonates conveniently with your fears or desires. These are not accidents, they are tests, probes to measure your response, to discover weak points, to map your psychological landscape. To resist, cultivate discernment, observing patterns over time, recognizing repetition, and noting inconsistencies. Trust must be granted cautiously, monitored continuously, and revoked when evidence of exploitation emerges. Every subtle form of influence relies on the manipulation of perception. Humans rarely act on reality alone. We act on our interpretation of reality. The manipulator shapes this perception, introducing suggestions that alter our beliefs, nudging us to act in ways that align with their design. To counter this, develop the capacity to step outside immediate impressions. Question motives, scrutinize narratives, and reconstruct situations from multiple angles. Clarity arises from examination, not assumption. Freedom arises from deliberate observation, not passive reception. The architecture of manipulation exploits emotional vulnerabilities. Fear, hope, pride, guilt, these are levers. The manipulator applies pressure incrementally, observing responses, adjusting the intensity, and timing interventions with precision. Emotional literacy becomes essential. Recognize when your feelings are being invoked as instruments, differentiate between genuine intuition and induced impulse, and allow reflection to intervene before action. Emotional mastery is not coldness, it is strategic awareness, the ability to feel without surrendering control. Consider the power of framing. Every choice presented to you carries implicit boundaries, and a manipulator crafts these frames meticulously. Options appear neutral, beneficial, or inevitable, yet the architecture guides you toward a predetermined conclusion. To resist, expand the frame. Step beyond the presented boundaries. Examine unspoken alternatives, and consider consequences outside the suggested narrative. Reclaiming the decision space neutralizes the manipulator's advantage, transforming constraint into perspective. The manipulator is patient. They observe, experiment, and wait for the precise moment when influence will be most effective. Their patience is a weapon. To counter it, cultivate equal patience. Observe before reacting, reflect before responding, and resist the compulsion to fill silence or ambiguity with assumption. Every pause is an opportunity for observation, every hesitation a shield against premature compliance. Deliberation is your defense. Impulsivity is your vulnerability. Patterns are the manipulator's key. Humans repeat behaviors, and these repetitions create predictability. The manipulator exploits predictability by testing responses and adjusting tactics accordingly. To resist, you must cultivate unpredictability, not in irrationality, but in controlled variance. Vary responses, withhold automatic reactions, and act with conscious deliberation. Predictable behavior invites control, disciplined variation maintains autonomy. Silence is as potent as speech. The manipulator often fills silence with suggestion, interpreting hesitation or uncertainty as malleability. Learn to embrace silence as your ally. Observe the behavior of others without immediate reaction. Let reflection guide response. When you are not hurried to fill the void, you reclaim control. Patience, observation, and restraint transform vulnerability into agency. Manipulation thrives on ignorance, of self, of motive, of consequence. The unmanipulable mind cultivates self-knowledge with relentless rigor. Map your own impulses, recognize habitual reactions, identify the triggers that external forces exploit. Anticipate how your own desires, fears, and habits might be used against you. Knowledge of self is the foundation of freedom. Awareness of vulnerability is the precursor to mastery. Social dynamics are a crucible of influence. Peer pressure, expectation, and cultural norms are invisible levers. A manipulator exploits these pressures, presenting conformity as natural, desirable, or inevitable. To resist, cultivate independent thought. Evaluate behaviors and narratives against your own criteria of perception, not against imposed consensus. Autonomy of judgment shields the mind from collective manipulation. Language itself can be a weapon. Manipulators select words with precision, shaping perception and nudging behavior. Compliments, questions, warnings, even silence, each carries weight. Listen closely not only to what is said, but how it is said, what is emphasized, what is deferred, and what is omitted. The unmanipulable mind reads between words, discerning intent beneath presentation. Manipulators exploit cognitive biases, the predictable distortions in human reasoning. The availability heuristic, confirmation bias, and overconfidence are common tools. Recognizing these tendencies within yourself disrupts predictability. When you identify a bias being activated, you reclaim decision-making. The mind aware of its own distortions becomes less penetrable. Internal dialogue is a frontier of manipulation. The manipulator may never act overtly. They only need to prompt self-doubt, guilt, or desire within you. These internal manipulations are amplified when unexamined. Cultivate metacognition. Observe your own thought processes. Question assumptions, and distinguish self-directed reasoning from externally induced influence. Mastery of inner dialogue fortifies the mind from both internal and external manipulation. Preemption is essential. Anticipate tactics before they are deployed. Consider the likely moves of those seeking to influence you. Evaluate the consequences of multiple scenarios. Strategic foresight transforms vulnerability into control, turning potential manipulation into an opportunity to exercise agency. Observation without judgment is powerful. The unmanipulable mind watches the world as a strategist, noting patterns, detecting incongruities, and interpreting intentions. It sees the motives behind gestures, the architecture behind words, and the strategy behind behaviors. Judgment may follow, but observation comes first. This disciplined awareness forms the bedrock of autonomy. Resilience is cultivated, not innate. The manipulator tests patience, emotional balance, and clarity. Each provocation, subtle or overt, challenges your equanimity. The unmanipulable mind develops endurance, maintaining clarity under pressure and sustaining strategic thought amidst provocation. Emotional resilience transforms influence from threat into information. Every interaction becomes a source of insight. Analyze, triangulate, and integrate data from behavior, language, and context. Observe consistency in deviation, intent, and action. Patterns reveal strategy. Awareness transforms information into armor. The unmanipulable mind does not merely react, it interprets and positions itself advantageously. To never be manipulated again is to engage in continuous self-cultivation, observation, reflection, strategic anticipation, and disciplined response. Manipulation may be inevitable, but surrender is optional. The mind that is vigilant, patient, and strategically aware maintains freedom in a world designed to constrain it. Agency is forged through disciplined awareness, emotional mastery, and strategic anticipation. Each observation strengthens perception, each reflection reinforces resilience, each deliberate action asserts autonomy. In this relentless cultivation, manipulation loses its efficacy, transparency replaces illusion, and freedom of choice becomes reality. The unmanipulable mind sees influence not as threat alone, but as data, as structure, as a landscape to be navigated with foresight and discipline. The world remains complex, relationships remain dynamic, and intentions remain hidden. Yet mastery is achieved not through avoidance, but through preparation, perception, and strategic action. To navigate the labyrinth of influence unscathed is to step fully into the perspective of Machiavelli, to see human behavior without illusion, to anticipate motives without sentiment, and to act with deliberate precision amidst subtle forces. The mind that achieves this is not merely defensive, it is sovereign, moving with clarity, control, and unassailable agency, in a world of persistent manipulation. Manipulation is rarely dramatic. It thrives in subtlety, in the half-glances, the casual phrases, the small deviations from expected behavior that accumulate over time. Each gesture, each word, each pause is a test, probing the contours of your mind to determine where influence can penetrate. The manipulator is patient, deliberate, and observant, calculating their approach based on the faintest signals of reaction. To remain unmanipulated, you must cultivate a mind that sees these signals before they take root, that interprets intention before action, and that positions itself with foresight and precision. Awareness alone is insufficient. Discipline, anticipation, and strategy must accompany observation. Consider the economy of influence. Manipulators invest effort for maximal control, a carefully timed suggestion, a calibrated appeal to pride or fear, or a subtle alignment with your expectations, can bend your will without your noticing. They rely on patterns, predictability, and your own assumptions. To counter this, you must disrupt predictability, vary responses, withhold immediate reactions, and act with deliberate intention. Predictability is vulnerability. Strategic variance is strength. The unmanipulable mind is deliberate in behavior, inscrutable in intent, and sovereign in choice. The most pervasive manipulations are internalized. Guilt, shame, hope, desire, and fear. These internal levers are amplified by external nudges. A manipulator need only activate them, and you become both agent and subject, acting under influence while believing in your own volition. Mastery over self is therefore paramount. Observe your own reactions, question your impulses, and recognize when external forces are shaping internal states. The unmanipulable mind is vigilant to both external and internal influence, maintaining equilibrium amid subtle coercion. Language is both tool and weapon. Words carry meaning, tone, and intention. The manipulator crafts language to influence perception, presenting options as neutral while steering decisions toward desired outcomes. Observe phrasing, note what is emphasized and what is omitted, and analyze the architecture behind every statement. A mind attuned to linguistic precision perceives hidden intent, neutralizes subtle coercion, and reclaims agency. Every conversation becomes reconnaissance. Every statement a vector of potential influence to be mapped and interpreted. Framing shapes perception. Choices are rarely neutral. They are presented within a structure designed to guide thought. The manipulator engineers these frames, subtly constraining perception to achieve compliance. Resistance requires expanding the frame, consider alternatives, question implicit boundaries, and evaluate outcomes outside suggested narratives. Freedom is regained not by rejection alone, but by understanding, restructuring, and reclaiming decision space. The social sphere amplifies influence. Peer pressure, expectation, norms, and conformity are silent levers of manipulation. The manipulator exploits the human desire for belonging and approval, making deviation seem risky or undesirable. To resist, cultivate independence of judgment. Evaluate collective behaviors through the lens of personal strategy and insight. Autonomy of thought shields against subtle coercion, ensuring decisions align with deliberate intention rather than external compulsion. Observation is the bedrock of resistance. Notice inconsistencies, omissions, hesitations, and patterns of repetition. Every interaction yields data. Analyze over time. Detect anomalies. The manipulator relies on unawareness. The disciplined observer transforms information into defensive architecture. Observation must precede judgment, and insight must inform action. Awareness without analysis is superficial. Analysis without observation is incomplete. Mastery emerges from their synthesis. Anticipation transforms vulnerability into advantage. The manipulator acts strategically, predicting reactions, timing interventions, and adjusting tactics. To counteract, cultivate foresight. Envision possible moves, calculate consequences, and prepare responses. Strategic anticipation ensures that influence encounters a mind already aligned in readiness, reducing coercion to transparency and neutralizing covert attempts to control behavior. The interplay of emotion and reason defines susceptibility. Humans act on feeling first and rationalize later. The manipulator exploits this tendency, leveraging desire, fear, and hope to shape decisions. Emotional literacy and self-regulation are therefore critical. Recognize when emotions are being externally provoked, differentiate between genuine instinct and induced reaction, and allow reflection to mediate action. Emotional mastery is not denial, it is calibrated agency. Trust is both shield and vulnerability. The human tendency to assume reciprocity, to respond in kind, to mirror intentions, is fertile ground for influence. Manipulators exploit trust to gather information, test boundaries, and exert leverage. Exercise discernment. Grant trust deliberately, observe consequences, and remain prepared to withdraw it when exploitation is detected. The unmanipulable mind treats trust as a controlled variable, not an unconditional assumption. Even subtle forms of persuasion, advice, compliments, warnings, appeals to identity, can influence behavior if unobserved. Awareness is the first line of defense. Question the motives behind every act, evaluate its long-term impact, and resist reflexive compliance. The disciplined mind interrogates intention continuously, transforming potential vectors of influence into insight. Patterns are the manipulator's scaffolding. Humans repeat behaviors, and these repetitions create predictability. Exploiters observe, test, and adjust tactics to capitalize on these patterns, to resist, cultivate unpredictable, deliberate variation in response. Act with awareness, withhold instinctive reactions, and ensure decisions reflect strategy rather than reflex. Controlled unpredictability strengthens autonomy. Cognitive biases compound susceptibility. Confirmation bias, availability heuristics, overconfidence, and framing effects skew perception. Recognize these tendencies within yourself. Anticipate how external actors may exploit them and implement reflective strategies to mitigate bias. A mind aware of its distortions becomes resilient, less malleable, and increasingly sovereign. Manipulation also operates through omission. What is left unsaid, unshown, or ignored can influence perception profoundly. Observe gaps in information, question the absent context, and reconstruct understanding independently. Awareness of omissions restores clarity, countering the subtle shaping of perception. The unmanipulable mind interrogates both presence and absence, statement and silence. Resilience is cultivated, not inherent. Manipulators test patience, emotional stability, and clarity. Each provocation challenges composure and attention. The disciplined mind sustains equilibrium, observes without reaction, and interprets behavior strategically. Emotional endurance transforms potential influence into data for analysis. Neutralizing subtle coercion. The unmanipulable mind is an active strategist. Every interaction is an exercise in reconnaissance, every gesture a source of information. Observe, triangulate, and interpret. Detect consistency and deviation. Predict intention. Prepare response. Influence becomes transparent, reaction becomes deliberate, and autonomy becomes fortified. Anticipation and preemption are essential. Consider likely tactics, map probable outcomes, and plan interventions in advance. Manipulation loses power when met by foresight, structured observation, and disciplined reflection. The unmanipulable mind positions itself advantageously before engagement, neutralizing subtle coercion before it manifests. Mastery over internal impulses is as critical as external observation. Guilt, fear, desire, and hope are potential levers of manipulation. Recognize when these forces are activated, question their origin, and exercise deliberate choice. Self-mastery ensures that internal vulnerabilities do not become external liabilities. Every encounter is a lesson, every observation a tool, every reaction a test. The disciplined mind integrates experience, identifying patterns of influence, refining defensive strategy, and strengthening autonomy. Manipulation becomes visible, predictable, and ultimately powerless. Awareness, patience, and deliberate response converge into the architecture of unassailable agency. To never be manipulated again is to cultivate a mind that sees both the overt and the subtle, that anticipates intention, discerns motive, and acts with deliberate precision. It is a mind that observes without reflex, feels without surrender, and responds with strategic clarity. Machiavelli's insight is your guide. The forces of influence are inevitable, yet surrender to them is optional. The unmanipulable mind navigates the currents of power with sovereignty, turning potential intrusion into strategic advantage. Freedom from manipulation is not merely defensive, it is proactive. Observation, anticipation, emotional mastery, and disciplined variation in response ensure autonomy. Influence becomes data, tactics become transparent, and subtle coercion is rendered ineffective. The mind that achieves this is sovereign, moving with clarity and control, a strategist in the labyrinth of human behavior. As you step deeper into this understanding, realize that mastery over manipulation is not a destination but a continuous practice. Observation sharpens, discipline strengthens, foresight deepens, and agency consolidates. Each encounter reinforces autonomy, each insight fortifies clarity, and each deliberate action asserts control. You are no longer simply reacting to influence. You are engaging with it consciously, strategically, and unassailably. The manipulator will always exist, influence will always be present, but the unmanipulable mind thrives amidst it, transforming observation into insight, clarity into strategy, and awareness into power. Sovereignty over thought, precision in action, and discipline in emotion become your unshakable fortress. In this relentless cultivation, freedom is no longer theoretical, it is your lived reality. You have walked the labyrinth of influence, traced its corridors, observed its hidden levers, and now stand at the threshold of unassailable agency. The world around you is rich with subtle forces, each interaction a potential vector of manipulation, each gesture a test of perception and will. To never be manipulated again is not merely to react, it is to preempt, to interpret, and to act with deliberate intention. The manipulator seeks to bend your mind, yet you have learned the architecture of influence, the machinery of human desire and fear, the invisible threads that shape thought before consciousness intervenes. Awareness has become your sword, discipline your shield, and foresight your map through the unseen terrain. Consider the smallest interactions, where influence often hides in plain sight. A pause before a word, a fleeting glance, a carefully chosen compliment. These are not accidents, they are probes, testing boundaries, seeking vulnerabilities. The unmanipulable mind recognizes them instantly, assesses them dispassionately, and neutralizes their effect before they can take hold. Every gesture becomes data, every word an instrument of insight, every silence an opportunity to observe, calculate, and prepare. In this relentless vigilance, the currents of manipulation no longer threaten. They are visible, predictable, and therefore powerless. Emotional mastery is the linchpin of autonomy. Desire, fear, hope, and guilt are levers that manipulators wield with precision, yet you have learned to observe them without surrender. Feel without being compelled, anticipate without being coerced, and act without reflexive obedience. Each emotional impulse is now a signal, a vector of information to GUI. Your strategic response, rather than a chain to bind your will. The mind that masters its own internal currents cannot be bent by external pressures. It flows, deliberate, responsive, sovereign. Trust, so often exploited, has been recalibrated. You grant it deliberately, observe its consequences, and retract it when necessary. Reciprocity and loyalty no longer hold you captive. They are measured instruments in the orchestration of your autonomy. You navigate relationships not as a pawn reacting to cues, but as a strategist interpreting patterns, anticipating maneuvers, and maintaining control over both perception and action. Social pressure, cultural expectation, and collective influence have lost their power over you because your evaluation of reality rests not on assumption, but on disciplined observation, tested insight, and deliberate choice. The architecture of manipulation is now transparent. Cognitive biases that once made you vulnerable, confirmation bias, framing effects, overconfidence, are no longer hidden pitfalls, but known tendencies to monitor, manage, and, when necessary, subvert. You understand how patterns shape behavior, how omission and suggestion can bend perception, how language and framing can subtly constrain choice. These forces no longer operate secretly upon you. You see them, anticipate them, and act before they can take hold. Observation, reflection, and strategic foresight converge to create a mind that cannot be easily influenced. Yet this mastery is not merely defensive, it is proactive. Influence is inevitable, but surrender is optional. You engage with the world strategically, interpreting motives, predicting actions, and responding with precision. Every interaction becomes an exercise in clarity, every conversation a source of insight, every decision an assertion of sovereignty. You move through life not as prey but as a strategist of your own destiny, armed with the knowledge of human behavior, the discipline of emotional mastery, and the foresight to anticipate subtle currents of power. The mind that cannot be manipulated is also fluid. It adapts without losing integrity, observes without attachment, and acts without impulsivity. Freedom from manipulation is not rigid. It is the capacity to respond optimally, to perceive intention, and to exercise choice with unwavering clarity. Each moment of engagement, each choice made deliberately, reinforces autonomy, strengthens insight, and deepens sovereignty over thought and action. The manipulator becomes irrelevant, for their instruments no longer find purchase. Look at yourself now, the invisible threads that once guided your thoughts, the subtle nudges that once bent your will, the hidden levers of influence that once seemed unavoidable. They lie exposed before you. You have dissected the mechanics of manipulation, anticipated its strategies, and fortified your mind with observation, discipline, and foresight. You are not simply aware, you are sovereign. You are not simply cautious, you are deliberate. You are not simply surviving influence, you are mastering it. Now, step forward with that knowledge. Move through the world as an architect of your own destiny, engaging with intention, observing with clarity, and acting with precision. Let no word, no gesture, no subtle probe bend your will again. The currents of influence that once threatened to control you are now your instruments, visible and interpretable, their power diminished by your understanding. Every encounter is a choice, every decision an assertion of agency, every action a declaration of sovereignty. Embrace the responsibility that comes with this mastery. The unmanipulable mind is rare, formidable, and potent. It carries with it the burden of constant observation, the rigor of disciplined reflection, and the vigilance to anticipate and counter subtle forces at all times. But within that burden lies liberation, freedom from coercion, freedom from invisible control, freedom to act, choose, and shape your life with unyielding precision. Step into that freedom fully. Let the lessons of human behavior, the principles of strategy, and the insights of Machiavelli guide every move. Refuse the invisible chains, resist the subtle coercions, and confront the currents of influence with deliberate, unshakable authority. You are no longer subject to manipulation, you are sovereign. You are not a vessel for another's will, you are the architect of your own. Carry this knowledge into every interaction, every decision, every moment of life. Let your awareness, discipline, and strategic insight define your path. The manipulator will always exist, but they cannot touch you. Your mind is fortified, your will is unassailable, and your agency is absolute. Now, act. Move through the world as a strategist, a master of perception, a sovereign of thought. Let no subtlety, no whisper, no unseen hand bend your will. Command your reality with clarity and precision. Embrace the power of unmanipulable agency, and live not as a pawn, but as the master of your own destiny. The world is a labyrinth of influence, but you are the architect of your path through it. Step forward, unwavering, unyielding, and unstoppable.